welcome to Riders Week Day 4. Have you guys been enjoying it so far? Good. Today, well, first of all, before we get started with everything, we have to thank a whole bunch of people. So first of all, let's thank Tech Crew for making this all work. Give a wave to your teacher. Say, hello, educator. Thank you for bringing us. If any of your parents are Booster Club members, make sure you thank them for continuing to give us support so that we can run this every year. It's really important. So, today we have something really, really special, and I think you guys will really, really enjoy this. We have two performers today that are going to be working together, Mr. Nate Marshall and Miss Jamila Woods. So let's give them a round of applause really quick. So just a little bit about Jamila Woods. She's a poet and vocalist raised in Chicago, Illinois, and she graduated from Brown University, where she earned a BA in Africana Studies and Theater and Performance Studies. Influenced by Lucille Clifton and Gwendolyn Brooks, much of her writing explores blackness, womanhood, and the city of Chicago. Her poetry is included in the anthologies The Breakbeat Poets, New American Poetry in the Age of Hip Hop, Courage, Daring Poems for Gutsy Girls, and The Uncommon Core, Contemporary Poems for Learning and Living. She's a singer whose second album is coming out in May. Jamila is currently the associate artistic director of nonprofit youth organization Young Chicago Authors, where she helps organize Louder Than a Bomb, which is the largest poetry festival in the world. She designs curriculum for Chicago public schools and teaches poetry to young people throughout the city. Nate Marshall is from the south side of Chicago. His first book, Wild Hundreds, won the Agnes Lynch Starrett Prize. He's a co-editor of The Breakbeat Poets, New American Poetry in the Age of Hip Hop. His rap album, Grown, was released in 2015 with his group Daily Lyrical Product. He's a visiting assistant professor at Wabash College. He earned his MFA at the University of Michigan, where he served as a Zell postgraduate fellow. He is a founding member of the poetry collective Dark Noise. His work has appeared in Poetry, Indiana Review, The New Republic, and elsewhere. He was the star of the award-winning full-length documentary Louder Than a Bomb, and has been featured on the HBO original series Brave New Voices. At the end of the presentation today, Jamila's book is available for $20, and Nate's book is available for $16. You should really come down and purchase one of those at the very end. Today, Nate and Jamila are going to do something really, really special. How many of you have heard of Gwendolyn Brooks before? Has anybody heard of Gwendolyn Brooks? Yeah. Very, very important author, not only in America but in the world. She was the first African-American woman to win the Pulitzer Prize. And today, Nate and Jamila are going to do a tribute to Gwendolyn Brooks. So please join me in welcoming both of them.
Hey everybody.
Greetings.
How y'all feeling?
Yeah? Cool. So I'm Nate, in case that was confusing.
And I'm Jamila.
Yes. And we're here to talk about Gwendolyn Brooks, who is like definitely, I think, both of our heroes. Yeah, definitely a hero. So should we start with the video maybe?
Yeah, maybe just a little bit, since I saw a few hands go up, people who know who Gwendolyn Brooks is. Does anyone want to shout out something you know about her?
We real cool, right. So yes, so she's a poet. Her kind of most famous poem is a poem called We Real Cool, right? She was born in 1917 in Topeka, Kansas. But when she was like a month old, she moved to Chicago, and that is where she lived out pretty much her whole life. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things I thought was interesting learning about Gwendolyn Brooks is how I felt a lot of similarities to her, because she went to a lot of different schools. And when she was growing up, it was in the time where schools were just becoming desegregated. So the first high school she went to, it was like this really prestigious, mostly white school. And then she transferred to this all black school. And then she ended up going to a third school. And so I think throughout all of that, she kind of got a different perspective on like her racial identity and how she fit in different environments. And I think that informed her writing a lot.
Yeah, and she started her writing life super duper young. Like, she actually walked up to her mom when she was like 5 or 6, and had begun to like keep a journal and like told her mom like, look, I wrote these things. And her mom was like, wow, you're gonna be like a great writer. And it turned out to be true. Like her first poem was published when she was only like 13. She had a poem published in Chicago Defender. And she like went on to have an incredibly like long and rich writing life that lasted over 50 years.
So yeah. And in addition to being a writer, she was also a teacher and a mentor, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. But there's a project that Nate and I were both involved in.
Yes. Like we said, Miss Brooks was born in 1917, and so that means like a few years back was what would have been her 100th birthday, right? 2017. And so for that, there were a bunch of things that happened all over the country to like celebrate her and celebrate her legacy. And one of the things that ended up happening was a play that me and Jamila got a chance to be a part of that was called No Blue Memories.
And it was a collaboration with this company called Manual Cinema. And so to say it's a play is true, but it's kind of like an unconventional play because they use shadow puppets, film, a live band, and all of these different elements to tell a story that's live on stage, but also gets to be filmed and become a video later that people can see. So Nate and our friend Eve Ewing wrote the script for the play, and me and my sister wrote the music for the play. So we're gonna show you a little trailer for the show that happened.
So the folks who said "We Real Cool," right? Y'all remember that poem? Does anyone remember that poem? Cool. Yes, I do. So I'll say it if you want to like say it with me. How's it go? We real cool. We left school. We lurk late. We strike straight. We sing sin. We thin gin. We jazz June. We die soon. Right, so that's the poem. Super little, like short little poem. And what you'll see in this piece that was sort of the trailer is Jamila and her sister like took that poem and just made it a whole lot funkier. So you'll see that in a second.
Yeah, and in addition to that, I think in addition to wanting to make the poem funkier, we also wanted to include Gwendolyn Brooks talking about how she feels about that poem. So you'll hear that too. We can talk about that after.
boys, I say here in this poem 7, and they were for shooting pool. But instead of asking myself, why aren't they in school? I ask myself, I wonder how they feel about themselves. The pool players, 7 at the Golden Shovel. We real cool, we let's go, we work, link, we strike, straight, we sing, sing, we engine, we jazz, tune, we jazz, go.
We're real cool. We left school. We learn clean. We strike straight. We sing, sing. We sing, sing, chin. We jazz June. We jazz July soon.
Yeah. Told you. It's pretty cool. So yeah, so that was a project that we had a chance to work on initially back in 2017, but it's cool because there's still, the play is still sort of traveling around, so it's like now touring all around the country and like even across Canada too, which is kind of cool.
And not just in and not just in theaters, but also a large part of the tour is doing it in high schools, in part to kind of, keep learning about Gwendolyn Brooks in a different way than just through reading her poems, but through kind of seeing her life on stage in this way.
Right. I guess any questions? Like, I feel like we've thrown a lot at you. We've sort of talked a lot at you. But are there any questions to this point? Yeah, right here. Pardon? Oh, is there one specific thing she focuses her poems about? That is, I would actually say no in many ways, right? And so one of the things that we have up here is a letter that she wrote to an anthologist, right? So like the people that like make like textbooks and those kinds of things, and I think one of her sort of frustrations in her life was that she felt like people kept using the same poems of hers, right? So people kept using poems like "We Real Cool" or "The Bean Eaters" or "A Song in the Front Yard," right? Which are these sort of small, very focused poems. But she's like, no, I write about everything. Like my work is about everything. I think, I think like she wrote for over 50 years, so her work is really wide. I think broadly, like she's really concerned about like telling the stories of like people in her community. But there's a wide range of what that looks like.
I think that's really true. And one of the things that the play does really well is show how her writing evolved over time. And what I love about Gwendolyn Brooks is she not, like, because a lot of times people get older and they're like, what are these new kids doing? They're like trap music, like what are they doing? But she always looked to her students and would listen to them and would read the stuff they were reading, and then that would then influence her work. So I think at first a lot of her work, she'd use different forms of poetry or like kind of this, kind of more complex language sometimes. And then when some of her students were writing in free verse and kind of experimenting with writing using language, how we actually speak, she would kind of learn from them and grow from that.
Over here.
Yeah, they were handmade. So Manual Cinema will make the puppets, and they have this really elaborate process. They'll like trace them out to make like drafts, and then they'll make the nice ones. Like those are physical. Like I have one of them in my house still. Like they're all, there's probably I don't know how many puppets, hundreds of puppets that existed from the show. And after each show, they let people come on stage and play with them and see how it works.
Right over here. Gwendolyn Brooks was probably the first person that I ever read who wrote a poem about a place that I actually had been, and a place that I like spent time in. And I know that probably like sounds small, but it was actually, it was really profound for me as a young person, to be like, oh wow, like people can write things, people can make art about where I'm from. Because that wasn't a feeling that I had, and it really made me feel like the idea of me being a writer, the idea of me writing and writing about like the people and places I cared about wasn't crazy.
I think for me, I agree with that too, but I love this quote that Gwendolyn Brooks said where she said, "I'm a writer perhaps because I am not a talker," and she talked about how like she never always felt like she could express herself fully, like just speaking to people. But when she's on the page, she has control and she can fully express herself. So I related to the fact that she wasn't necessarily an extrovert or like kind of always wanting to be talking and be in the public eye. I liked that she identified as like a shy person or not a talker, because I felt always like that growing up, and I always kind of felt like writing was the place where I could express myself most clearly. And so, yeah, that's part of why she's my hero as well.
Okay, cool.
Talk about the writing process of the play a bit?
Yeah, for sure. So when me and Eve wrote this play, we had to think about like, okay, well, Gwendolyn Brooks has like she lived for like 70 years. She has a pretty long life. Like what do we do with it, right? Like how do we make something of it? And so one of the first things that we did is we read a lot. Like we read a lot of like books about her life, whatever we could find. But we also went and did kind of original research, right? So we went to the University of Illinois because they have like her archives. They have like a lot of her papers, which was kind of cool, right? To see like, because we saw a lot of like letters that she wrote back and forth with people and with her presses and with those things. But we also saw like a bunch of other funny things. Like she loved watching like trash daytime TV. She loved watching like soap operas. And so in her papers, there's like the TV guides where she's like circled her shows or like written little notes in the margin. And so that was very cool. And so so we went down there, we spent a bunch of time with some letters, and and that was really good because, and you know, like you can always read a book about someone. Like you can, you know, y'all read books, hopefully, like now, but to be able to do sort of original research and in that person's own words, see them deal with, just it's like I feel like you get a broader picture of who they actually are as a person. And so that was really cool. And from that, we like, it was kind of like writing a long, like research paper or something. It felt like being back in school in a weird way. But when we figured out how to like make it into like a play, make it into something that was like fun and that could like work with music and be exciting and be engaging for people of all ages. Yeah.
And then I could talk a little bit about what making the score was like, or like the music for the play. It was really, as a songwriter, it was cool to like get the script, and then there were specific parts where the writers wanted there to be music. So the first thing me and my sister did was we made a Spotify playlist. We actually made a lot of Spotify playlists about trying to imagine like what was the music that maybe Gwendolyn Brooks would have been listening to, or for her younger scenes, like what would her mom have had on in the house? How can we kind of get inside the world of the music, of the time that the story was being told in? So we did a lot of research and actually listened to a lot of jazz music. So the beginning part of the video that you saw was like a jazz standard that my sister arranged, and then kind of staying in the spirit of that music is how we tried to kind of get more into like the funk bebop jazz sound with the real cool part. So this is like an example of one of the playlists we had. The band was me and my sister and some other local musicians. And a lot of the coolest parts of making the music for me were when there were these moments of time when a whole poem from Gwendolyn Brooks would be inside of the play. And so one of the coolest ones was when it would basically be like translating the words of her poems into lyrics, so that the band could be singing parts of the poem and then an actor on stage could be saying parts. And so that was a really cool exercise, almost like a prompt of like, how do you translate this prose poem into something that can be sung and be kind of catchy and be kind of like a different format but telling the same story. I think, the next thing we wanted to kind of read in terms of that question of like how her work has directly influenced us. We're both from the south side of Chicago, so that's one thing. But there's this particular poem that we wanted to read, and then I'll read kind of a poem that's my response to it.
Yeah.
And kind of going off of some of my favorite quotes and some of the things that frame my connection to Gwendolyn Brooks. She, like we've been talking about, writes a lot about her community, the people who were in her neighborhood of Bronzeville where she was living. And this is a quote when someone said, like, why were you writing about, what do you write about? She said, I wrote about what I saw and heard in the street. There was my material. And this was another thing that gave me permission as a poet, because I always thought my life was kind of boring. I was like, I live in this neighborhood called Beverly. Nothing really goes on. We don't even have like a movie theater, Starbucks. Like, my life is boring. And so I just kind of always perceived I don't have any stories to tell. And when I read this quote by Gwendolyn Brooks and started reading more of her work, I realized that it's all about recognizing your experience and the things you see. No one can see them like you. No one has experienced them like you. So that means no one can write them like you. And so Nate's gonna read this poem that Gwendolyn Brooks wrote about Beverly, the neighborhood I grew up in, and then I'll read my poem.
This is called Beverly Hills, Chicago. And there's an epigraph, so it's a quote from someone else. And the people live till they have white hair. Ian Price. The dry brown coughing beneath their feet, only a while, for the handyman is on his way. These people walk their golden gardens. We say ourselves fortunate to be driving by today, that we may look at them in their gardens where the summer ripeness rots, but not raggedly. Even the leaves fall down in lovelier patterns here. And the refuse is a neat brilliancy. When they flow sweetly into their houses, with softness and slowness touched by that everlasting gold, we know what they go to tea. But that does not mean they will throw some little black dots into some water, add sugar and the juice of the cheapest lemons that are sold, while downstairs that woman's vague phonograph bleats, "Knock me a kiss," and the living all to be made again in the sweatingest physical manner. Tomorrow, not that anybody is saying that these people have no trouble, merely that it is trouble with a gold-flecked, beautiful banner. Nobody is saying that these people do not ultimately cease to be. Sometimes their passings are even more painful than ours. It is just that so often they live till their hair is white. They make excellent corpses among the expensive flowers. Nobody is furious. Nobody hates these people, at least nobody driving by in this car. It is only natural, however, that it should occur to us how much more fortunate they are than we are. It is only natural that we should look at their wood and brick and stone and think, while a breath of pine blows, how different these are from our own. We do not want them to have less, but it is only natural that we should think we have not enough. We drive on. When we speak to each other, our voices are a little gruff.
This poem is called Beverly, huh? You must be made of money. Your parents must have grown on trees. Bet your black is tinged with green. Bet you sleep on bags of it. Bet your Barbies climb it. Bet you never wanted. Bet you never had to ask. Bet you golf. Bet you tennis. Bet you got a summer house. Bet you got a credit card for your 5th birthday. Bet you played with bills for toys. Bet you chew them up for dinner. Bet you spit your black out like tobacco. That's why you talk so. Bet you listen to Green Day. Bet you ain't never heard of Al. Bet your daddy wears a robe around the house. Bet his hands are soft as a frog's belly. Bet your house is on a hill. Bet the grass is always freshly cut. Bet you feel like a princess. Bet the police protect your house. Bet you know their first names. Bet your house has 100 rooms. Bet a black lady comes to clean them.
Yeah. Love it. Yeah, I'll read this. So, yeah, I felt like a lot of, I kind of love that, like, to go back to Miss Brooks' poem, because where I grew up just sort of east of that neighborhood, Beverly. And so to get to school, I took a school bus that like always went through Beverly. And so like to hear her describing what it's like to like drive through that neighborhood and sort of feel less than or feel whatever, I was like, yeah, that's like every day. That was like 1st grade through 8th grade. That's the whole time. So, yeah, I'll read this. This is called Out South. And they, since they were not the ones dead, turned to their affairs. Robert Frost. In Chicago, kids are beaten. They crack open their pavement. They don't fight, they die. Bodies bruised blue with wood. Cameras catch us killing, capture danger to broadcast on Broadways. We, Roseland stars, made players for the press, apes cage from first grade until shake us. We make terrible tambourines. Packed into class, kids pass like kidney stones. Each street day is unanswered prayer for peace. News gushes from mom's mouth like schoolboy blood. Ragtown crime don't stop, only waves, hello. Crime waves break no surface on news, goodbye. Every kid that's killed is one less free lunch. A fiscal coup. Welcome to where we from. Yeah, I mean, so it's a lot about like when I say Miss Brooks is a hero to me, right? It's about writing, but I think it's also like about so much more than that, right? So one of the things that was also true of her, right? She was the poet laureate of Illinois and also of the U.S. for like many years, and in that time, she like always made it a point to like go visit schools and visit prisons and community centers and libraries and all sorts of places and talk to people all over about poems. And she wrote a lot of letters like back and forth with young people who were interested in poetry, with folks who were incarcerated who were interested in poetry, and all sorts of, just literally anyone, right? And for me, like as not just a writer, but as like an educator, that is a model that is really inspiring to me, right? To think about like how to be so generous with oneself in service of the work.
Yeah, and I think even going back to the picture of the letter that you spoke about, where she was so generous with her students and people she was teaching, but at the same time, she would always stand up for herself and not let people misread her work or misrepresent her work, which I think is really important for artists to keep in mind. That generosity of spirit doesn't mean that you have to let people take your work away that you wouldn't want them to.
Absolutely. Questions. Again, I know we've like talked for a bunch, so I want to make sure that if y'all have things you're left wondering, that we can respond to them. Oh, okay. How long did the show take? Probably almost a year. From the time that me and Eve like started working on the script and kind of outlining to when the show actually happened, because there were like many points to it's like first once we kind of like sat and agreed, me and Eve like worked on the script and did all that research and like made a kind of early draft, and then we would sort of send those things as we were working on them to Jamila and Ayana, and then also to the artists at Manual Cinema, and there was a lot of back and forth. So that whole sort of building process probably took almost 6 months, and then we had to actually cast the show and pick actors and all that, and then once the actors got into rehearsals, we learned other things, right? So we ended up dropping scenes, editing, just based off of like what they found would work, what they found would sort of be successful. So it was a long process, but it was really cool. It was like very rewarding.
Yeah, right there.
As admirers and educators of Gwendolyn Brooks's work, do you guys believe that there's a deeper message that she wanted to portray in her piece to the schools?
Okay, So do we think there's a deeper message that she was trying to portray? What I like about Gwendolyn's work, a lot of it, is that the message is, it's not hiding, it's not, even if the language is complex, and even like the Beverly poem we read, I love the tone of it, because it's like, we're driving through this neighborhood, observing these people who live very differently from her, but she's not, you know, she's not saying she hates them or that she wishes them evil, but there's like that discomfort of knowing it's unfair that they have more than her. And that's such a complex feeling. It could have been easy for her to have been like, oh, I don't like people from Beverly. They're so stuck up, they have so much. But no, she took the time to communicate this complex feeling, and I think that's something that gives me permission to do that in my work. So I like that her work isn't necessarily something, because I remember a lot of poems in school, I would just read them and be like, I don't get this. And I don't know if I'm meant to. But with Gwendolyn Brooks, I like how it's like her message is that it's very, it's not hidden, it's kind of accessible. Yeah.
A thing that, I agree with all of that, and I think a thing that strikes me about her work is like, for the really the most of her career, like, she wrote poems about people, which, yeah, like her poems are just filled with people. I think she's always like trying to figure out people and figure out humanity in a way that is kind of admirable, right? I think especially, I think like we stand to learn a lot from her, right? Because I think that too often now people try really hard to like not listen to folks who they think they don't agree with, or people who seem different than them or whatever. And Miss Brooks just seemed like she was always really like paying really hard attention to what people were up to and not judging them or making these kind of pronouncements about them, but just being like, okay, like how, even if sort of how you seem to be moving is foreign to me, like I wanna honor that, and I wanna like understand you on your own terms. And that just feels like such a lost, important skill.
Yeah.
So Gwendolyn Brooks, noticeably a Chicago author. I think you may have tweeted recently about like a top 5
Oh.
Chicago poets.
Known pundit, Nate Marshall.
For people who like Gwendolyn Brooks and want to delve more into Chicago writers or even Chicago musicians, like where might they look for those voices?
Yeah. Jamila Woods.
Oh, Nate Marshall. But also Patricia Smith, I think, is definitely in the lineage of Gwendolyn Brooks, and she's from the west side of Chicago. Who else?
Mick Jenkins, he's a rapper and he actually on his most recent album has a song that like uses We Real Cool, kind of like remixes We Real Cool for like the hook. But even just like his sort of style, the way in which he makes observations feels very, it's obvious that he's influenced by her, and that's pretty cool to see in like a different form.
Yeah, and that, like, you can see a lot of rappers in that way in the lineage of Gwendolyn Brooks, because she was really just reporting on what she saw in her community, which is the same thing a lot of rappers do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Chance the Rapper is in many ways like sort of a student of Gwendolyn, whether or not he knows it. He knows it. Yeah, who else?
Iman Loren.
Iman Loren.
She is a chapbook, a lot about the neighborhood she grew up in on the south and west side.
Yeah, Patricia Frazier, who's the National Youth Poet Laureate. Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good list. Oh, Sandra Cisneros. Yeah, Sandra Cisneros is like, they were actually kind of friends. When Sandra Cisneros was a student studying poetry, Gwendolyn Brooks came and visited her class, and they like kind of hit it off because they were both from Chicago, and they were like, they had a very long correspondence over many years. So.
question was, through Gwendolyn Brooks writing about her environment, did she more often insert her own perspective on what she saw, or try to go into the perspectives of other people? And to me, I think it's kind of a mixture. There's a certain empathy in her writing that I sense. There's this poem called Lovers of the Poor, and it's kind of like talking about these white women who go into, like, I don't know where they go, like some, do you know the poem I'm talking about?
Yes, I do know the poem.
It's kind of just describing this idea of people in privilege going to, like, do charity, and kind of how that can sometimes be problematic, but also, you know, these people have good intentions. And so there's never any, like, pure villain necessarily in her work, which I think makes it more interesting than if she was just writing people off. And at the same time, there's a poem that's kind of about a woman, a black woman who's going through an abortion, and that's like, she's giving empathy to that character as well. So it's very, I think it's really an important choice that she makes to not, to include her perspective and also give the characters a perspective as well. What time is it? Yes. I can sing a poem in the spirit of Gwendolyn Brooks that I wrote about Chicago. It's called LSD, and that stands for Lakeshore Drive, and I'll sing it. A body of water inside me reminds me of oceans, though I've never known one. Born by a cold one, only a small one compared to the coast. I prefer it to most. I like water that don't burn my eyes when they open. I won't let you criticize my city like my skin. It's so pretty. If you don't like it, leave it alone. You gotta love me like I love the lake. You wanna love me better, love the lake. You gotta love me like I love the lake. You wanna love me better, love the lake. You didn't think I really had it like that. You didn't think I really had it like that. They didn't think I really had it like that. Matter of fact, we can swim in it. I know you wanna get on the highway, highway, baby. Look at it my way, baby. See, we could fly away, baby. And we don't ever leave the ground. No, 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 no. Thank y'all so much. So yeah, if you want to learn more about Gwendolyn Brooks, this book, your book you have, the book Blacks, is a really great place to start. And we also have our own books, and we can also y'all can come say hi to us if you have a few minutes.
All right, thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.